Maybe we can begin with how you first came to work in psychedelic psychotherapy.
Sure. So I really believe my position in this field has divine purpose because I did not plan to be in this field, really didn't even plan to be a therapist, but my journey has led me here nonetheless. And to maybe concretize that a little bit, I graduated from my master's program in 2016 and was looking to continue African American research or Black American research in my clinical work. And so I did random Google searches and I came across Dr. Monica Williams, who was working in Kentucky at the time, which is where I'm from. Shout outs to Kentucky. And then long story short, I started working with her at her private practice clinic. And then she approaches me and asks if I would be interested in getting and going to this training about MDMA assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of PTSD. And I'm like, yes, I absolutely would be interested because I recall in my master's program, um, experiencing this course called Treatment Issues and being exposed to the work of Dr. Gabor Mate and his work on addiction and ayahuasca. So I had a connection to plant medicine work prior to her invitation. So 2017 in January, and I attend my first MAPS training, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And yeah, I we got selected to be one of the sites to participate in their phase 3 clinical trials, and we started our work at the University of Connecticut, specifically focused on treating participants, recruiting participants who are people of color, and really providing them with a culturally informed therapeutic experience. And it's been a journey, let me say. But yeah, that was back in 2018. And although we are not part of the active phase 3 studies now, we still are continuing advocacy work around the importance of diversity and inclusion and cultural responsible care in psychedelic medicine.
I often reflect on how I feel very lucky to be kind of in this area right now when all of this stuff is opening up. And the way you kind of laid out all of that, I feel like Gabor Mate's work is incredibly valuable. And then having this treatment that actually works for PTSD, I feel like if this had been a few decades ago, a lot of the therapies weren't as effective, right? So do you feel that sense as well, feeling kind of fortunate that
Mm.
if it feels like you found exactly the right, in my eyes at least, the optimum place to be really with this?
Absolutely. I could not have planned this better. I really believe it. My position in this field is very divine because is there must be something that I'm here to do to help advance the work on what health equity really means, and to really hold folks accountable to making sure that these treatments are accessible for folks who need it. Because right now, it's not too accessible. I mean, if you look at the research work, there's been an overwhelming majority of participants who have been white, which is part of the catalyst of MAPS targeting or talking with Dr. Monica Williams to help with recruiting diverse participants, but also therapists in the field are still majority white, and the need for cultural competent care is paramount. And I will continue to talk about it until we see some real changes.
Yeah. Did you have to undergo MDMA therapy yourself during the training?
So optional for us as part of the MAPS therapist training, but I did take MDMA in a one-time clinical setting. This was back in April of 2017. So literally almost 4 years ago. Um, is crazy to say, but yeah, I had a really meaningful experience that I think really catalyzed me to, first of all, share my story, but also to um, really advance the conversation just with the knowledge and the perspectives that I have or that I gained from that experience.
Right. And does that tie into your work in kind of trying to get therapists to be more kind of culturally informed?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as part of our advocacy work that our team completed, and by our team, I mean the team with Dr. Monica Williams, so Terrence Ching, Jamila George, Mickey Kazicki, um, all the folks there at UConn. We actually were able to host the first ever psychedelic medicine and cultural trauma workshop and first MAPS training dedicated to recruiting and training more therapists of color. And we held that training in my home state of Kentucky. And this was back in August of 2019. So, yeah, like I said, the work has been slow and steady, but I feel very grateful to be able to show up in the ways that I can.
Yeah, I think this idea of the necessity of this therapeutic space and the therapist really knowing what you're facing, it seems so obvious and so fundamental. But I've seen, discussions where people of color have tried to start ayahuasca circles, but then the practitioners they don't want to offer it. Kind of, they see it as like, oh, we can't exclude people, and it ends up being incredibly insensitive to what people need, right? In terms of an atmosphere where everyone gets it.
Mhm. And in my experience, I will say, whether it's in my own experience in taking MDMA in that one time clinical setting or holding space for participants or patients in clinical work, participants of color specifically, there is there is a balance that I think I try to always hold and maintain in medicine work with folks of color because um, there we always have to contextualize the symptoms and we can't I believe um, just have this blanket like um, let me rephrase. It's important to understand how culture impacts the way symptoms present in different populations. And for me, I always draw this quote from James Baldwin because I think it really captures the essence of what we or what I've witnessed in grappling with in medicine sessions, which is color is not a personal or human reality, it's a political one. And so for me, I have been mindful and witnessed and experienced this navigation between the personal and political realities for folks of color. So it's like, on one hand, medicine work can help liberate you from the political realities that you experience, and you get to feel human. You get to experience joy, love without, carrying this burden of the political realities that exist. At the same time, stories about racial trauma, childhood trauma, developmental trauma, oppressive related trauma, that these can often show up and manifest in dosing sessions. And it's important for therapists to acknowledge the two, be aware of the two, and help participants or patients navigate the two. Because, at least for me, in my MDMA therapy experience, there was, in the beginning, there was this moment of liberation that I experienced where I say, that was the first time I felt free as a Black woman in my adult body. And it was so powerful. But then things started to shift a bit and I felt like my body was slowing me down. And so, of course, like putting my therapist hat on in that situation, I'm like, asking my therapist, oh, is there something that I can do to help speed my body up? Well, little did I know, my body ended up being a majority of the work in that session, and really sitting with these stories of racial trauma, of childhood trauma in a very embodied way. And the defenses that, I have in my ordinary state of consciousness, those defenses did not work. And so I think it's important for therapists to help in this conversation, participants of color be able to navigate that territory, because for some participants of color, when these experiences of racism come up, this may be the first time that they really kind of have sat with the pain, and grieving that pain is a really important part of the process.
That really resonates with me. The kind of realizing that the trauma is really held in the body. I think that for a lot of people, that's a huge kind of insight. And I also think it's really important to emphasize what you did. I think my audience will know I go on and on about the fact that the kind of the absolute perspective in which you aren't your identity and you're completely free of it, that is true, but it's also true. The relative stuff is also true at the relative level. The stories still exist and impact you. And, it seems like after the 60s, there was a bit of a kind of tendency for people who are interested in this kind of stuff to, or at least white people to kind of, I think want people, it's kind of more convenient for them if you can just try and transcend all your stories. Then we don't have to talk about the difficult emotional stuff of kind of systemic racism. And I think that that's not a wise thing to do, to try and just completely obliterate the relative.
Absolutely. And I hear that narrative all the time, like, oh, let's just trip together and, everything is going to be, roses and butterflies. And, um, that is not, I think, the safest way to approach medicine work, especially if you're really in spaces to process trauma. And I'm really grateful for the work of folks like Camille Barton, who is a cultural somatics educator and trainer, because their work is really about incorporating more somatic based therapies in the psychedelic medicine field, which I think is so paramount. Because I think in this space we're in with mainstreaming psychedelics, there is this obsession with the research numbers and being the first, which and there's this like sense of urgency, which all of these have their roots in capitalism and white supremacy culture, and I think it's really important that we have more of a relational approach to medicine work, and not just reduce medicine work to the drugs in these particular highly medicalized settings. That we can't forget about the magic and the mystery that is an active participant in the healing process. And I am excited for the future protocols that will be developed that honors the creative aspects that are present with the medicine work. So whether that means incorporating more somatics into trainings, as well as into the clinical work, clinical trials, or if that also, includes incorporating live music, drawing, dance, that I think there's so much space and opportunity to really create the space to make sure it's representative of the power and the potential of what these medicines can do.